Japan, in the early 20th century, harbored grand ambitions. It sought to become a dominant power in East Asia. The island nation was resource-poor and relied heavily on imports. To fuel its growing industrial and military might, Japan looked towards its neighbors. This expansionist drive led Japan to occupy Manchuria in 1931, a move condemned by the League of Nations. Japan's aggression did not stop there. It launched a full-scale invasion of China in 1937, marking the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War. The brutal conflict saw widespread atrocities committed against Chinese civilians, further isolating Japan on the world stage. The United States, with its interests in the Pacific and its commitment to open trade, viewed Japan's actions with increasing alarm. The U.S. condemned Japan's aggression and sought to curb its expansionist ambitions. The relationship between the two nations deteriorated, setting the stage for a confrontation that would have global consequences. Japan, feeling the pressure of U.S. opposition, grew increasingly desperate. Its leaders believed that a decisive strike against the U.S. Pacific Fleet would cripple American power and pave the way for Japan's dominance in Asia. This belief, fueled by a potent mix of nationalism and militarism, ultimately led to the fateful decision to attack Pearl Harbor. The United States, deeply troubled by Japan's actions in China, responded with increasing pressure. The U.S. implemented economic sanctions, aiming to curtail Japan's access to vital resources. The most significant of these sanctions was the oil embargo of 1941. Japan, heavily reliant on U.S. oil imports, was dealt a severe blow. The embargo threatened to cripple its war machine and strangle its economy. Japanese leaders saw this as an act of aggression, an attempt by the U.S. to stifle Japan's rightful place as a leading power. Negotiations between the two countries faltered. Mistrust ran deep, and neither side seemed willing to compromise on their core interests. The U.S. demanded that Japan withdraw from China and renounce its expansionist policies. Japan, for its part, refused to back down, believing that it was locked in a struggle for survival against a hostile West. The impasse created a dangerous situation, with tensions escalating with each passing day. The oil embargo, while intended to pressure Japan into changing course, had the unintended consequence of pushing the two nations closer to war. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the course of history changed forever. Japanese aircraft, launched from 6 aircraft carriers, descended upon the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack, a meticulously planned surprise assault, caught the Americans completely off guard. Battleships moored at Ford Island were easy targets. Airfields were strafed, destroying aircraft on the ground. The attack lasted for 2 harrowing hours. When the smoke cleared, the devastation was immense. 4 U.S. Navy battleships were sunk and 4 others were heavily damaged. Over 180 aircraft were destroyed, and countless others were damaged. The human cost was staggering. 2,403 Americans were killed, and another 1,178 were wounded. The attack on Pearl Harbor, a date which will live in infamy, as President Franklin D. Roosevelt famously declared, plunged the United States into World War II. The surprise attack, a blatant act of aggression, unified the American public in their determination to defeat Japan. The nation was now fully engaged in a global conflict that would test its resolve and shape the world for generations to come. The Pacific War, ignited by the attack on Pearl Harbor, was a brutal and costly conflict. Island-hopping campaigns, characterized by fierce fighting and heavy casualties, became the hallmark of the Pacific theater. From the beaches of Guadalcanal to the jungles of New Guinea, American and Japanese forces clashed in a struggle for supremacy. The Battle of Midway, a decisive naval battle fought in June 1942, turned the tide in favor of the Allies. The Japanese Navy, dealt a crippling blow, was never able to fully recover. As the war progressed, American industrial might began to tell. The U.S. Navy, bolstered by new aircraft carriers and battleships, gained control of the seas. American bombers operating from island bases pounded Japanese cities and industrial centers. By 1945, Japan was on the ropes. Its military was exhausted, its economy was in shambles, and its cities were in ruins. Yet Japan refused to surrender, clinging to the hope of a negotiated peace that would preserve its imperial system. The stage was set for a final, bloody confrontation. Section 5. The Manhattan Project, a Scientific Gamble. While the war in the Pacific raged, a top-secret scientific endeavor was underway in the United States. The Manhattan Project, launched in 1939, brought together the brightest minds in physics and engineering with the goal of developing an atomic bomb. The project, shrouded in secrecy, was driven by the fear that Nazi Germany would develop the weapon first. Scientists at Los Alamos, New Mexico, worked tirelessly, racing against time to unlock the secrets of the atom. The first successful test of an atomic bomb, codenamed Trinity, took place on July 16, 1945, at a remote site in New Mexico. The explosion, equivalent to the detonation of 20,000 tons of TNT, sent shockwaves across the desert and ushered in the atomic age. The development of the atomic bomb presented President Truman with a momentous decision: whether to use this terrifying new weapon against Japan. The potential for ending the war quickly had to be weighed against the devastating consequences of unleashing such destructive power. Section 6: Hiroshima, a city obliterated. On August 6, 1945, at 8:15 a.m. local time, an American B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, dropped an atomic bomb nicknamed Little Boy on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The bomb, with a yield equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT, detonated 2,000 feet above the city's center. The effects were instantaneous and catastrophic. The blast obliterated everything within a 2-mile radius. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and fires raged through the city. The heat from the explosion, estimated to have reached 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit, vaporized people and objects in an instant. A massive shockwave leveled structures miles from the hypocenter. Then came the radiation. Invisible and insidious, it poisoned the air, water, and soil. Tens of thousands of people died instantly. Many more would succumb to burns, radiation sickness, and cancer in the weeks, months, and years that followed. The official death toll from the Hiroshima bombing is estimated to be between 90,000 and 166,000. Section 7, Nagasaki, a second bomb, a similar fate. 3 days after the Hiroshima bombing, on August 9, 1945, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb, this time on the Japanese city of Nagasaki. The bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, was even more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima, with a yield of 21,000 tons of TNT. The target, the industrial center of the city, was obscured by clouds, and the bomb detonated slightly off target. Even so, the devastation was immense. The blast, heat, and radiation killed an estimated 75,000 people. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, unprecedented in their destructive power, shocked the world. The use of atomic weapons marked a turning point in human history. The world had entered the atomic age, an era fraught with peril and uncertainty. Section 8: Surrender and its Aftermath. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had a profound impact on Japan. Faced with the prospect of further annihilation, Emperor Hirohito intervened, overriding his military advisors and urging his government to accept the Allied terms of surrender. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its surrender, bringing an end to World War II. The war's end ushered in a new era, one marked by the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The atomic bombings continued to cast a long shadow. The world grappled with the moral and ethical implications of using such devastating weapons. The bombings also had a profound impact on the development of international relations. The United Nations was formed in 1945 with the primary goal of preventing future wars. The horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki served as a stark reminder of the need for international cooperation and disarmament. Section 9: Remembering the Past, Shaping the Future. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain a source of profound reflection and debate. The use of these weapons, while instrumental in ending the war, came at a terrible human cost. The bombings continue to spark controversy, with historians and ethicists debating their necessity and morality. Some argue that the bombings were justified, that they saved lives by preventing a costly invasion of Japan. Others condemn the bombings as war crimes, pointing to the indiscriminate slaughter of civilians and the long-term effects of radiation poisoning. In recent years, there has been a growing movement to abolish nuclear weapons. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, adopted by the United Nations in 2017, reflects the international community's desire to rid the world of these weapons of mass destruction. Remembering the past, Learning from the mistakes of history and working towards a future free from the threat of nuclear war is the most fitting tribute to the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.